Has an agent ever shown you an annuity illustration with a historical growth rate of greater than 10%, 12, 15, 20%? Although it is, for some reason, still legal for them to show you those projections as historically based, I'm sorry, but that's just not going to happen. That doesn't mean a fixed index annuity is a bad idea as part of your retirement portfolio. It just means that maybe you need to find someone you can trust and who knows what they're doing to help you with those annuities. Let me show you what to watch for. So we're talking about fixed index annuities. There are two primary things that this particular financial vehicle is good for within your overarching retirement plan. In fact, I'd say it's better at these two things than any other vehicle. One is creating guaranteed lifetime income, and the other is as a bond alternative. And when we're talking about high promised rates of return, you're most likely dealing with the latter here, the bond alternative. On that note, you've probably heard that you should have a mix of stocks and bonds. Well, there are a lot of problems with that mainstream advice, and I think deep down people know that. I suspect that's why my book, Stop Investing Like They Tell You, hit #1 on Wall Street Journal's bestseller list, because there's something missing with that advice. We've explored the details of that in other videos and, of course, in the book, but long story short, there are better ways to invest. When I'm helping a client build out their investment portfolio for their retirement, when it comes to their market-based exposure, for the most part, we utilize what I call tactical asset allocation strategies. And I thoroughly detail those in this video. Those tactical strategies, I believe, are a better option than passive exposure to stocks, as most advisors would recommend. And then, for that bond portion of your portfolio, that's where a properly structured fixed index annuity, in my professional opinion, is far superior. For context, the Bloomberg US Aggregate Bond Index is generally considered the best representation of the total US bond market. Since it started in 1976, the average annual return has been just under 7%. Not too bad. But over the last 25 years, the average has been under 4%. Over the last 10 years, 2.2%. Over the last 5 years, 0%. With where interest rates are today, the performance of bonds has gotten worse. That and their movement with stocks has become increasingly in step. It's increasingly correlated. That was on display in 2022 when the 60-40 stock bond portfolio had one of its worst years ever. That year, while the stock market was suffering, bonds were down 13%. Being invested that way is a risk I wouldn't want to take if I were in retirement right now. It's a risk I didn't want my parents taking as I was helping them with their retirement. It's a risk I don't want my clients taking. And it's a massive risk that you don't have to take either. When you put your money in a fixed index annuity, as opposed to bonds, you are protected on the downside. As in, when the market falls, your account can stay flat. The stock and bond markets could both be down 20% on the year, and the money in your annuity would simply realize a 0% return. That's real downside protection. Perhaps you know all that already, and that's why you're already considering a fixed index annuity. And you might think that the annuity promising the highest return should at least get you something admirable. If you shoot for the moon, at least you'll land among the stars, right? That's not the case here. If you choose incorrectly, yes, you will be guaranteed to not lose anything from year to year, but your account will most likely not grow anywhere near as much as you were hoping, and definitely not anywhere near as much as you were projected, and most likely not anywhere near as much as you could have had you known what to look for. So first, I'll explain what I think the problem is, and then I'm going to show you my screen and talk you through exactly what to look for to actually get the best returns possible for this accumulation-focused fixed index annuity that you would like to serve as your bond alternative. Because the truth is, it's actually not that difficult, so you don't need to be intimidated by this. After finishing this video, you will be fully equipped to know the right questions to ask your advisor or your agent so that, 1, you can know if they know what they're talking about, and 2, if they actually have your best interest at heart. So let's do this. Here's my really brief overview of what I think's going on here. In short, the insurance companies and the banks, unsurprisingly perhaps, have gotten together to help them both sell more things so they can both make more money. And even though they have these financial vehicles that, if structured properly, could also make you a winner alongside them, so that all three parties here win, even though they have that, that is unfortunately not their top focus. They want to try to beat out all the other insurance companies so they can sell more, the other banks. You see, insurance companies realized that they could go to the banks and ask them to create a brand new index. Let's pause for a second to explain what an index is, in case you're unfamiliar. An index tracks the performance of a basket of assets, usually stocks. The most common index, one with which you are likely familiar, is the S&P 500. Essentially, this index goes up or down based on the performance of the 500 largest US-based companies. And if you have exposure to this index, the performance of your underlying account will be a function of how the S&P 500 performs. So if you have 100% participation, that's the term used inside these annuities. If you have 100% participation in the performance of the S&P 500 index, and it goes up by 10%, your account will also go up by 10%. If you have 50% participation in this example, your account will go up by 5%. Hopefully that's enough to give you an idea of how these indices work and how they're involved in the performance and projected performance of your fixed index annuity. So back to the racket between insurance companies and banks. An insurance company will have a bank create a brand new index. The bank will use some back testing of data to come up with an index that looks really good. That is one that would have performed really well had it been in existence. The bank will have all sorts of fancy jargon to explain why this particular set of rules that they're using for this index makes sense. But I suspect that, at least with many of these, they're just looking for what's going to give them the highest backward-looking percentages. Regardless of whether or not the investment methodology makes any actual sense going forward, those higher percentages will help the insurance company sell more, which ultimately means more money for the bank as well. You see, once the insurance company has this new index, they can plug it into their fixed index annuity product, and now, because it's a real legitimate, that is, government-approved index, they can illustrate it in the projections that their agents are showing prospective clients, what they're showing you. With those really high historical projections, their agents are able to sell way more of their annuities, which means those insurance companies are putting way more money into the banks in order to buy exposure to these newfangled indices. You see how this is working? They're all winning, but then when the index doesn't actually perform, that means your annuity doesn't perform. Now, banks and insurance companies have been doing this for a while, and when we fast forward 3 or 4 years, when those indices don't perform as their history suggested they would, the bank can scrap that one and create a brand new one. Why not? No harm done. Except for all those people who parked their money there behind very high surrender charges, no less, expecting those high historical returns. This is a big part of why we see so many horror stories with annuities. To be clear, I don't think every agent out there who is representing these products to you has malicious intent. I think there are plenty that just don't understand this themselves. But to be fair, there are also probably, unfortunately, some of the former kind as well. But that's not important. What's important is that you know what to look for. It's easy, really. You should look for those indices that have been around for a long time, the ones that have decades of track record. And I'm not talking about contracts, annuity contracts. I'm talking about the indices that you get exposure to within the annuity contracts. And there aren't many of them. Look for the S&P 500 first and foremost. Most fixed index annuities will have some way to get exposure there. The amount of exposure you're able to have, though, is not always great. I don't think we should get into the weeds in this video on exactly how to measure that exposure. We have in other videos. But to keep it short, we can look at 2 of the most common ways that your annuity might give you exposure to these various indices. I already briefly touched on participation rates. Your fixed index annuity is ultimately going to invest your money into sub-accounts. If the annuity has a sub-account that gives you 50% exposure to whatever the S&P 500 does, In other words, it allows you to participate in 50% of whatever growth the S&P 500 has. That means when the S&P 500 goes up 20%, your account will go up half that, 10%. If the S&P 500 were to go up 50%, your account would go up 25%. On the other side though, if the S&P 500 goes down, your account will stay flat. It will have a 0% return. You won't suffer anything from that. Another common method is through a cap rate. Again, it's pretty straightforward. If the S&P 500 or whatever index it is goes down, you don't suffer from that at all. Your account value would be credited 0%. So if you had $1 million in there, you're still gonna have $1 million in there, even though the market went down by 10%, down by 20%, 30%. No matter how much, you stay flat. Again, you can see why this would be a good bond alternative. But if the sub-account you're investing in allows you to have exposure to the S&P 500 up to a cap of, say, 8%, for example, you will realize 100% of whatever the S&P 500 realizes up to that cap. So in this case, up to 8%. So if it goes up in a year by 10%, your account will go up by 8%. If the S&P 500 goes up by 20%, your account only goes up by 8%. If the S&P 500 goes up by 7%, your account goes up by 7%. So you're gonna get everything between that range of 0% and 8% in this example. So you're looking for annuities that will give you the best exposure to the S&P 500 or other long-standing indices. Better yet, access to multiple of these options that have been around for a long time. Other examples will include the NASDAQ 100 and the Russell 2000. They've been around since the 80s. Let me show you a behind-the-scenes comparison of two different accumulation-focused fixed index annuities. I'm going to remove company names here so I don't get into any trouble, but that's also not the point. The options here change all the time. You'll need to know what to look for, or find someone that you can trust to help you sift through all this. But yeah, let's check this out. When we look behind the scenes, it's really telling. I think you're going to be legitimately surprised by part of this. Here are the underlying investment options, the sub-accounts, for one of the highest selling annuities out there. One that promises really high growth. In fact, I could legally illustrate this one with a greater than 20% historically backed return. That'd make it much easier to sell, right? Unfortunately, I strongly believe that the actual returns that this one will experience, especially if I invested it exclusively in that top option, would be far, far less. And what's interesting here is that many individual states have come to the same conclusion that I have. They won't let insurance advisors illustrate these particular newfangled indices. Some states are more restrictive than others. This is just an example. I ran this one through the state of Arizona, and all the grayed out boxes here represent all the index options that the state of Arizona has determined that they don't want illustrated for their citizens. That's pretty revealing, right? It's crazy. This doesn't actually hinder many agents though. If you're in Arizona or any other state with the same restriction, agents will often just say you're in a different state in order to run the illustration with those prohibited sub-accounts. That way, they're still able to show you these indices and your hypothetical returns. You see, they're actually still allowed to invest your money in these underlying accounts. They're just not allowed to illustrate them in many states. So yeah, watch out for this. As you can see here, of the 27 sub-accounts, 20 are not allowed by the state of Arizona and many other states. But that's not exactly what we care about. Given everything that we talked about, what I want to see is how many of these underlying investment options for my money here, this money that I do want to grow, how many of them have been around for long enough to give me an idea of what the actual returns might be. We can check this little box here to exclude indices without live historical data. Effectively, it's saying, just show me the ones that have a track record of at least a decade. Come on. Unfortunately, for this particular, very popular growth annuity, our options go from 27 down to 3. And one of those options is just the requisite fixed account that all annuities have to have. The other two are pretty much the same, some S&P 500 exposure with or without a fee. In this case, the one without a fee gives us exposure to the S&P 500 up to a cap of 8.25%. That's pretty good, but again, it's our only option, which is not great. Now let's compare that to this one that I found to be particularly good, right now at least. Regardless, it's going to serve well for the comparison. This annuity has 43 sub-account options, which is great. That's the most I've seen. But again, notice that several of them are these newfangled indices, so we still have to be careful. And you can still see several of them that are also not allowed by the state of Arizona to be illustrated. But here, it's only 12 of the 43 that Arizona seems to have found suspect. Not nearly as many as the annuity that we just looked at. And if we filter for only those that have live historical data, we're left with 15 options, compared to the 3 that we just had with the last one. And apart from their fixed account, we have several different ways to get exposure to the S&P 500, utilizing participation rates with spreads, and cap rates. And it looks like they each have a fee-based option as well. There's also an option here for the NASDAQ 100 and another for the Russell 2000. So you would have the ability to diversify across a few different types of indices that have been around for decades. All of that's great. But we can even look at the apples to apples comparison here between this one and the last annuity that we evaluated. This one's S&P 500 cap rate option without any fee is at 9.25%. So even that is higher. But if you didn't know what to look for, an illustration from that first annuity could have been structured to look way better than this one, even though this one is clearly better for you as a bond alternative. If you know someone that you're worried is missing this and is about to get taken advantage of, please share this video with them. Because this is serious. These are long-term contracts with long-term implications. They can be amazing, but they can also be devastating if done incorrectly. And so these specific options change over the years. So it won't always be this second annuity here that I just showed you that will come up on top for you. It's one of the best that I see right now, but it hasn't always been there. And our team is always sifting through the new ones that come on the scene and the old ones as they make changes. If you want help to figure out what the best one out there is right now for your unique situation, whether as a bond alternative or to give you a guaranteed income stream, or 2 different ones in order to accomplish both of those things within your overarching retirement plan, we would love to help. Click the link at the top of the description to let us know a little bit more about you so that we can see if we'd be a good fit, to be able to help you and guide you throughout your retirement. After you have that link up, you should probably click on this video so that as you're filling out your information, you can better understand the top 5 risks to your retirement portfolio that most advisors entirely ignore. I'll see you soon.